Morning, everyone. It's great to be here. Thanks, Peter, for inviting me again. So many friends and partners here in the audience. Karen Headland is here. John Robert Smith is here. The Andersons are here, toiling in the fields. Knox Ross, you heard from earlier. So many friends that we have here, and it's great to be with you all. But I wanted to spend just a minute for those of you who don't know me and don't know us. We are the Rail Passengers Association. Our legal name remains the National Association of Railroad Passengers. We are the leading voice for more than 40 million rail passengers in the U.S. And why do we do this? Why is this a charity? Because we think it makes communities safer, it makes them more accessible, makes them more productive, it improves the lives of everybody who lives, works, studies, and plays in towns all across America. That is the picture that Peter was talking about. That was before the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And we work with everyone we possibly can, local, state, federal, tribal, city leaders, planners, local legislators, congressional members, you name it. We produce economic benefit studies, white papers, we do model legislation, and we testify, as Peter noted, before many, many bodies and take part in a lot of regulatory work. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out that we were among a handful of the folks that played a pretty significant role in creating the Investment in Infrastructure and Jobs Act, along with T4A, with a lot of the rail organizations around the country, and there's so many of them. And we really thought we had built a structure to really set the future course of passenger rail in the United States. We had strong partners on both sides of the aisle. There's a reason why that was called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, because it was in fact bipartisan. And it really kicked off a tremendous growth path for passenger rail in the United States. But at the same time, we are a grassroots organization. We've never forgotten that. And we've mobilized a grassroots network of 127,000 members, donors, and supporters around the country to improve and expand conventional intercity passenger rail, commuter rail, high-speed rail, increase connectivity, first mile, last mile, and really ensure safety. Those are our sort of overarching goals. So I don't have as cool a disclaimer as Board Member Headland did for her talk, but I will give you this disclaimer. I'm going to start with a little bit of the state of play in D.C. today. This is a snapshot of kind of where the chessboard lies right now. We are a 501c3. We are nonpartisan. We do not take a position on any specific legislation or people. What I'm describing here for you is my viewpoint as a political professional. This is not what I necessarily like or dislike, support or don't support, but I'm looking at the chessboard and looking at where the pieces are. So I'll start with that. But I want to remind everybody where we are. The IIJA, when we talk about transformative and historic and all these other adjectives that you've heard over the years since 2021 when the bill passed, a lot of people still haven't gotten their heads around just how big a deal that was. The orange bars here show you the funding for passenger rail in the IIJA compared with the prior 5-year bill, which is the little blue boxes. So when we say transformative, this is what we mean. And now that we're in fiscal 2025, we're at a place where this money is beginning to make a difference. It's starting to get out the door. It's starting to show up in bridges and tunnels and real work and real jobs and real opportunities and real capacity. That's where we are right now. And yet, we are in the middle of a forefront funding fight. And I think this is useful to take everybody through, because we hear a lot of talk about money that's not getting out the door and what's happening to this money and what's happening to that money. It's easiest to think about this in 4 buckets, okay? So you have the enacted funds. The fiscal 2025 continuing resolution that was passed a couple weeks ago, that kind of gets that fiscal 2025 money out the door, sort of, with an asterisk. And the reason for that is that President Trump and Elon Musk are still trying to find ways to cut even from the CR funds. So we'll talk about that in a second. Fiscal 26 process, that's the last tranche of IIJA money. And that's kind of in limbo right now, in part because we're waiting for the president's budget, and then you would get appropriations markups around that after that. Third is rescissions. Rescissions are a way of changing your mind about money that you have already appropriated. It is a rare thing, but it does happen. And you could do this as part of what's called reconciliation, which is a unique sort of budget legislative trick. I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. You could also do it as a formal rescission package. And from what we know, the director of the Office of Management and Budget is drawing up a rescissions package which would target what's left of the IIJA funds. And then, of course, there is the whole idea of reconciliation. There is a lot of debate within the Senate on how far they want to go with reconciliation. Do they want to do a one bill or a two bill strategy? Reconciliation is a great tool when you have a slim majority, because it means that you don't need the normal 60 votes that you would need in the Senate to get anything done. You can do it with a simple majority. But the trick is you can only do it once. And so that forces a lot of decisions about, do we do it as one bill? Do we do it as two bills? What do we include in it? Because you're only going to get one shot at it. So reconciliation is kind of out there on the table as well. This is a little bit of a busy chart, but I want to explain it to you because once I do, I think the visual will really make a point. Regular order is the way we are supposed to fund the government. There are 12 appropriations bills that the Congress is supposed to pass each year, and that keeps all of the various departments and projects and funding going. If you look on that slide, 2005 is on the far left side of the slide, and then up to 2025 on the other end. That is the number of continuing resolutions we have had in place of regular appropriations going back to 2005. You can see that we haven't done regular order in a long, 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 long time. And it's funny, in DC, we always talk about appropriations as if we're having this conversation about the normal 12 bills. And yet, going back to 2005, we've never really done that. We've never really done that. The big bubbles over each of those, that tells you the duration of those continuing resolutions. Some of them were short-term, some of them were full year, 365. So again, when you think about what Congress's main role constitutionally is to pass budgets. And this is where we are. This is the political landscape in which we have operated for the past 2 decades. And so when we talk about what happens to the IIJA money and to the advanced appropriations money that's in there, the authorized money that could be appropriated later, we can talk about appropriations in the normal way all we want, but the reality is this is kind of how DC functions and has been functioning for a very long time. So, as I said earlier, fiscal 25, the continuing resolution should have solved the problem for the fiscal 25 money in the IIJA and some of the other programs. But there's still 2 wrinkles. There's one called impoundment. Now, after the Nixon administration, there was a law passed that said you can't do impoundment. The Trump administration is seeking to do impoundment anyway. There are people who are very much against that, and they are being taken to court. So whether we get impoundment on fiscal 25 or not is going to be decided by the courts. In the meantime, during the negotiations on the continuing resolution, Democrats wanted some language in there to kind of hold off the Elon Musk-driven cuts. That didn't find its way into the CR. And so now there is a possibility of looking for a way to get a rescissions package, which would come from the OMB, which is where Congress comes in and passes a separate piece of legislation that says, we changed our minds. And all that money we told you about before, we don't want to do that. We've changed our minds. That could happen. So that's where fiscal 25 is. How much of this is at stake? Well, it's $10 billion in fiscal 26 money is certainly at stake, right? Impoundment could hit that. The DOGE cuts could hit that as well. But this one, to me, is very illustrative of the risk that we're in right now. Those green bars, that shows you the capital spending by Amtrak in the early years of the IIJA. Those yellow bars, that's what's planned. And you can see that we are right in getting up into the yellow bars now. It's in fiscal 25. So after decades, and I mean decades, 5 decades, 6 decades of underinvestment in passenger rail infrastructure in the United States, we are finally poised to be at the top of that yellow bar in fiscal 25, and we're getting ready to blow it up. That's an incredible shame and a policy failure. All right, so more uncertainty. This is the discretionary grant calendar from the Federal Railroad Administration. Again, a little busy, but once you explain it, you'll kind of get where we're at. The lines that go between the stars are the evaluation periods between making a proposal and getting a grant award. CRISI grants, that's at the top line there. There is a new notice of funding opportunity that is expected sort of around May if they stick to this calendar. And if they have CRISI money to award, it would get released next February. The restoration grants are next. Federal-state partnership, Northeast Corridor, that's all pushed off to 2026. We'll see what happens to the Fed-state partnership program. I think you're throwing away an incredible opportunity here, but it's also up in the air right now. Fed-state national, you'll see we are apparently waiting for some award announcements from the cycle that began under the waning days of the Biden administration. We'll see. Again, as we talked about the legal status of the IIJA and that money, in theory, that money has to go out the door. Now, they could change the rules on how they hand out that money, and that's kind of what we're waiting to see. Corridor ID, we've heard a lot about that this morning. And that, again, if they stick to the calendar, late fall, they'll be accepting some more corridor ID proposals. And again, corridor ID, I think, has a lot of flaws the way it was constructed. I think there's way too many hoops, way too many gates to get through. It takes a long time. There are too many steps that could be concurrent. Nonetheless, we didn't have anything before, and now we actually have a way to build a pipeline of promising projects all around the country. So again, want to see this thing continue to the extent that we can. So what's coming next? Fiscal 26 budget process, it's late. No surprise. Typically, the first year of any incoming administration, the budget's late. We expect it typically in February or so, but there's no rule that says it has to be that. First Monday in February is where we should have been. We haven't seen anything yet. We expect what's called a skinny budget, which again, it gets at the reality that they usually spend all year preparing a budget submission for the following year. The administration only came into office on January 20th. So typically, the first year in administration of an incoming administration, you'll get what's called a skinny budget, a kind of high-level outline. For all of you who don't remember your civics classes when you were kids, the president's budget is a starting point. The president's budget is not quite meaningless, but it's pretty close. If you look at the Constitution, it is the Congress's job to come up with what the budget actually is. And some presidential budgets are pretty meaningful starting places. Other presidential budgets, you'll hear the cliche term dead on arrival, and some are deader on arrival than others. So we'll see where this is, but the skinny budget may be coming next month, we think. Because of this delay, we're going to see the appropriators have to slide off to the right on writing their fiscal 26 spending bills. My gut tells me we're going to be looking at another CR. Call me crazy, but I think 20-year track record suggests that we are looking at another CR. So on top of all of that chaos, there's the debt limit debate, right? So the cap on borrowing came back into effect in January. We're looking at what are called extraordinary measures, what the Treasury Department calls extraordinary measures to keep the lights on in the federal government. We're going to hit that drop dead date in the summertime. To avoid default, we're going to have to get something done. Now, with the debt limit, reconciliation is an easy, quick way to do that. I don't need 60 votes. I only need a simple majority. And right now, the Senate, the Republicans have 54, so they could move this through without a problem. Remember what I said, you only get to do it once. So you're going to shoot that bullet, you need to shoot wisely. If they need 60 votes, if they choose not to do reconciliation here, Democrats could have some leverage and they could make some demands. What does that do to the negotiations over the debt limit? Well, it stretches it out. And when it stretches it out and they start putting demands in, if negotiations happen, what happens to the rail programs in that scenario? So, with all that doom and gloom out of the way, this is why all of us as advocates and in industry is going to benefit from these billions of dollars that are ready to get spent. This is the future we need to be sharing with our members of Congress and with our local legislatures as well, because this did give us a framework for a prosperous future. Now, this is the existing passenger rail network as it is today. As Board Member Hedlund said in her remarks last night, this is kind of the bare bones remnants of what was taken over in 1971 as railroads were going bankrupt, losing money on passenger rail service. That is what it could look like. If you start laying in the corridor ID program routes and the long distance study routes, if you lay all that together, this is what the network future could look like. This is a remarkable improvement in passenger rail in the United States. It would add 43 million people to the Amtrak network. This I got courtesy of John Robert Smith. I see, are you back there, John? There you are. He had this done up when he was still leading Amtrak. The fact that we have an Amtrak at that time contributed $7.4 billion to the U.S. economy. That number today is closer to $10 billion. And we spend about $3 billion a year to have an Amtrak. So that's a pretty good return. And no, it's not Amtrak's profit. It's the towns that are served by Amtrak that collect the profit. It's their return on taxpayers' equity. So there is a strong economic benefits case to be made for passenger rail. On the left side here, this is the sort of ongoing economic activity that comes from spending on operating cost of the railroad itself. On the right side, that's what happens when you start building things. And how many of us have remembered over the years the lament about how we don't build things anymore? Well, we can still build things. We can build things in this country. We can build tunnels. We can build bridges. We can build sidings. We can build signaling. We can build cars. We can build stuff. But we have to actually do it. And when you build things, you inject life into an economy. And that is what we're right on the cusp of doing, and we may be taking that away. So one of the tools that we use at the association, particularly in talking to Congress, is we model out the economic benefits of passenger rail. We worked with the University of Southern Mississippi, the Trent Lott Center, to develop a railway calculator, which we use in-house. That calculator is our model for the direct benefits of passenger rail in a given place with a given level of ridership and a given mileage. We then take those outputs and we put them into a tool called Implan, which is a commercial off-the-shelf tool that's kind of the standard in economic benefits analysis. And so we use that combination of our model and the Implan tool to come up with a look at economic benefits for passenger rail around the country. So just as an example, you hear this all the time, and you're hearing it more now. It's become fashionable to bash Amtrak again for not making a profit. Why don't these routes make money? Well, they don't make money for Amtrak, but they absolutely make money for the communities served. Now, this is a little bit older analysis. This was done in 2019. So we do need to update this. But directionally, it's correct. You start looking at how much is returned to the community versus what we spend to have the service, and it's a no-brainer. The Empire Builder returns 5 times what we spend on it to the communities served. Texas Eagle, almost 10 times what we spend on it is returned to the communities served. This is in the form of not just direct railroad spending, but in payrolls that are supported, towns that are supported, tourism locations that are supported, hotels, restaurants, all of that kind of thing. Those folks in turn have jobs and they support their own communities going and buying their groceries and all the rest. So it creates this velocity of income through a community, and that's what we're able to trace. All right, lots of numbers, right? But what does it actually look like in real life? This is one of my favorite examples. Denver Union Station. How many people have been to Denver Union Station? Almost all of you. It's a fabulous, fabulous place. And it is a prime example of what happens when you inject rail investment into placemaking to really turn a place into something that is worthwhile. Denver Union Station right now, 10 chef-owned restaurants and bars. I've tried almost all of them. The boozy milkshakes are the best. That's my recommendation. There's a boutique hotel, the Crawford. I can't afford to stay there. My son says it's nice. My son lives in Denver. Thank you, JR. Amtrak, light rail, commuter buses. You can take a train out to the airport, which is, I always feel like the Denver airport is 2 states away. So it's great to be able to do that from downtown, from that station. And of course, Amtrak, RTD, light rail. There's the Colfax Avenue, the bus that goes up and down, the shuttle. It's a tremendous, tremendous asset. This picture on the left shows you what it was like before they started this project. You had a big hole in the ground. You had not much going on. And you had a station that really was kind of moribund. Now look on the right. In 2021, I want you to look at all those buildings, all that mixed-use retail, all those stores, all those restaurants, all those bars. That Amtrak didn't build that. That's private capital. And that's private capital that was attracted to that area because of the investments in the station and in the service and in the connectivity. Because you can do all you want to make the station beautiful, but if people can't get to it and from it, they're not going to come with their wallets and spend money. So this is an example of what happens when you make these investments. And this is an example in real life of that multiplier effect that I was describing to you. So when you look at their plans, when they started this out in 2007, you know, what they expected versus what they got, by the midpoint of the plan, they had to adjust upward because their employment growth was 5% better than they had planned, and the residential growth was 14% better than they had planned. And they are still on that trajectory. They are still on that trajectory. That is an example of being a catalyst for explosive growth. Virginia. I'm from Virginia. And I can tell you that Virginia is a model for how to do this in a state. Virginia and North Carolina have been remarkable in their passenger rail development. The Virginia service and Amtrak, $1.5 billion in economic returns to the Commonwealth of Virginia. $390 million in new tourist spending. It is profitable above the rail. Now, I use that phrase because it's important to realize that we're not talking about all in. We're not talking about the capital. We're talking about tickets covering the cost of running the train. It's one of the success stories. 2024 ridership, new record. Basically 1.4 million people on that service. The pre-pandemic record was 953,000. All those people are helping the Commonwealth of Virginia grow and thrive. The Downeaster. How many people have ridden the Downeaster? Got a handful here. That's a remarkable train service. And that was just basically coaxed into life by advocates, just like Knox Ross was talking about. You have 5 daily round trips now between Portland, Maine and Boston. Again, a little short route, really, but it has been a game changer for all of those communities. It has produced economic returns. Those economic returns, in turn, generate tax revenues and all the rest. It's pretty amazing. And it's also attracted private capital. And again, this is a point I want to underscore. It's not just about Amtrak. It's about creating the preconditions for the success of private capital. The fact that we have this Downeaster running helped to attract $105 million in investment to create a thing called Thompson's Point, which is next to the Portland station. I-20, I'm not going to beat this one to death because you guys have already seen it and know about it. But this is going to be a real thing. This is going to be a tremendous boon if we can get this thing done. It closes a glaring gap between population centers linking 110 million people. That alone will generate economic returns. Our own estimate is that if you take the 3 states served together and you add in the benefits that will be generated from just connecting this little obvious gap, that'll be worth $207 million to the states collectively. That's a significant benefit. Take a look. That's real people. That's real people. You can see she's being helped onto the train. She can't drive. She can't fly. She'd be shut in. She'd be shut in without trains and without Amtrak. And that's another real reason why we do the work that we do. It ends isolation for people with few or no options. It gives people travel choices that they need and want. We have stories of a gentleman who goes routinely to the Mayo Clinic for treatments. Can't get there except on the train. Lucille, she's a grandmother from Marks, Mississippi. She uses the train to go visit her kids and her grandkids in Memphis. John Robert was instrumental in getting that Mark stop. How long did that take, John Robert? Decades?
Probably 4 years. And keep in mind, the freight railroad said they needed 20 minutes dwell time to stop in Marks, Mississippi. And Senator Wicker reached out to me about it. I said, you can load everyone who lives in Marks, Mississippi in 20 minutes. Meridian has a 5-minute dwell time.
That is exactly right.
Getting down to the truth, and then it changes how that senator looks at that.
And that's the key point. The truth changes how senators and congressmen look at this. And that's why we work so hard to go tell the truth, so that they will change their minds. Tens of thousands of students in Virginia, I was talking about Virginia earlier, they use that service to get to and from University of Virginia or Virginia Tech. We've shared over 1,400 stories with the Surface Transportation Board, real passengers, and the real-world benefits of passenger rail travel. We've sent those to the docket. We've also sent similar stories to the docket about what happens when trains are late, what happens to those people and their needs. So we talked last night about the long-distance study. There are a lot of flaws with it. There are a lot of things about it that we take issue with, but we participated in all 26 workshops. And this was a remarkable document in many, many ways. The first one being that this was the first time in my memory that the Federal Railroad Administration spent time trying to find ways to grow service rather than to cut it. And there have been an awful lot of criticism out there from folks who frankly didn't know any better, saying that the study, that they didn't work hard on it, that they just sat in a basement and came up with it and drew a map. That's not the case. You may agree or disagree with their conclusions, but this was a group of very professional people that did a lot of work and modeling to come up with the results that they came up with, which was adding 15 routes on top of the existing 15 routes, adding 43 million people to the Amtrak network, increasing service to 102 new stations in small communities, rural communities. 9 million more rural residents would be added to the Amtrak network. 600 more educational institutions, 73 national parks, 73 additional medical centers. And this is a big one. We fought pretty hard for this in the study group. That you have VA medical centers. In some cases, there's only one in a state. And so you have veterans who have no other way to get there other than that train service. We wanted to emphasize that as well. The issue with that study was it was in a box. It was in a very tight box that was drawn for it. And I think I think as Board Member Hedlund mentioned last night, if it had had a different remit, we might have been able to look at different things. It did not. And I think for what it was constrained to do, I think it's a good starting point for us to think about the future of long-distance trains in the United States. So, what are our priorities today? Well, it's a lot more than just maps and dots. We really are focused on, at the association, 3 items. The IIJA, getting that finished, realizing the promise of the IIJA, working on the next version of the IIJA, the Surface Transportation Bill, and reminding Congress every single day that passenger rail enjoys broad bipartisan support across the country. So where we are on the IIJA, we're educating Congress on the work that's already being done. There are shovels in the ground. There's steel being bought. There's bridges being built. This is real work being done by real Americans in places all across the country that need it. Our association just finished 2 weeks of visits with members of Capitol Hill staffs and the legislators and senators. We brought in our grassroots members from all across the country, did 4 workshops to bring them in and prep them for those conversations. I personally did 21 meetings. We did around 200 meetings altogether as a group. And this was a message we were driving home in every single office that we visited, that the IIJA is working and it needs to keep working. We're also trying to help DOTs, chambers, universities, and individual rail advocates support their state and regional level projects that are advancing through the pipeline. I've spent the past month and a half talking to an awful lot of very worried state DOTs who have work that they need to get done, and they're waiting for that money to come out, and the money has not yet come from Federal Railroad Administration. And they're anxious, and they're worried, and they want to get it done. And somehow, they're not linking arms together and standing up and saying, we need our money and let's get this done. I think there are much more effective ways for them to do that, but if we're their outlet, we're happy to do that, and that's what we've been doing. Surface transportation reauthorization. Again, if I have a crystal ball, I don't think we're going to get a reauthorization in 2026. I think it'll be like the FAST Act before the IIJA, which we kicked the can down the road for a year on the FAST Act, and then we wound up with the IIJA. We may be in a similar situation for the Surface Transportation Bill. I think we will be, honestly. That said, my team, we've been working on our reauthorization blueprint for the past 18 months. We have about 20 pages of ideas around things like reforming NEPA, reforming the environmental review process. We've got to get out of this study, review, study more, study, oops, it's 7 years, we've got to do another study. We've got to get out of this. We've got to get out of this. Because right now, we're talking about decades to start new train service, as Knox told you earlier this morning. And anyone know when the Borealis first came into being as an idea? As an idea. Trick question, right? It was the 90s. And it launched last year. And it's doing great, beating the doors down for ridership. But they were thinking about it in the 90s, and we finally got it done last year. I can start an airline in 6 months for $3 million. I can. I can go wet lease myself 5 Boeing 737s for $150,000 a piece. I can go hire some contract pilots. The FAA, if they know who I am, and the FAA does actually know who I am, they will decide I'm not a crazy person, and they'll issue me a provisional certificate, and I can start flying. 6 months to start an airline. Minimum to start a new train service, 6 years. Minimum. And the reality is, like we saw with the Borealis, like we're seeing with the Gulf Coast service, decades and decades and decades of hard work. And folks, that is a policy failure. That must change. We will never get the service we want and deserve if we cannot change that. We think that we should see a little more use of categorical exclusions, for example. The equipment problem, that's another limiting factor. If I went to Siemens today, is anyone from Siemens in the audience? If I went to Siemens today and I wrote a $5 billion check and said, I want trains, they'd say, great, we'll see you in 2035. I can't start service that way. So we need to find a way to get past the equipment problem as well. One of the ideas we're thinking about is a national equipment pool, a leased pool of equipment that folks could go and pluck from. And that would provide stability for the industry, for the manufacturers, for the car builders, and it would also provide a ready source of equipment to start or pilot new services. We really think that one of the limiting factors in the United States is our industrial base, which we've allowed to be hollowed out over the decades to build passenger rail equipment. We need to build that up again. We want to address that in the Surface Transportation Reauthorization. I'll be Thursday, I'll be before the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee discussing our reauthorization priorities with staff. They've invited us to present on what we think that surface bill should look like. So those conversations are already starting for the 2026 expiration in the Congress, and we will be there. But again, our last piece here, we have to remind people at every opportunity, just as Knox Ross said, don't make this a red versus blue thing, because it's not. Passenger rail is one of the few things in America that can be not only bipartisan, but nonpartisan. Our polling shows that 78% of Americans support more investment in passenger rail in the United States. 57% support more investment in high-speed rail. 60% would spend $100 billion or more to improve U.S. passenger rail. And that 78%, by the way, that includes 95% of Democrats and 61% of Republicans. So do not make this a red versus blue issue, because it's not. This is a message that we were carrying to Congress last week and the week before, and I will tell you that every office I visited, whether it was Republican or Democrat, offered a lot of support for what we were trying to do. And there were a lot of very good, meaningful, meaty conversations. They sounded a lot like the conversations we had when we were drafting the IIJA. So I'm hopeful that Congress does understand what the future is and what future is possible if we don't cut off the investment too prematurely. So with that, I will get off the stage so we can have our break. I hope I didn't fire hose you with too many things, but I'm happy to, I don't know, are we doing the room for break, or is that a different thing? However you want to do it. But I'm happy to take questions during the break. But thanks very much for sitting through this, and please reach out to us if you need anything. We're always here to help.